Hello my dear YouTube audience and daily viewers. Welcome back to Crime Whisper. I know many of you use these videos to unwind or fall asleep. So before we begin, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. Case 1. Ronald DeFeo Jr. and the Amityville Murders. Our first case centers on Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., or, as many knew him, Big Ronnie. He was born on November 16, 1930, to Rocco and Annette DeFeo. In his youth, Ronnie was a tall, slender, handsome man, often compared to the silent film icon Rudolph Valentino, thanks to his intense gaze and smooth charisma. That charm caught the attention of Louise Marie Brigante, born November 3, 1931, to Michael and Angela Brigante. Louise was a striking beauty with dreams of becoming a model. She even moved in elite circles, once catching the eye of famous singer Mel Torme. After a brief courtship, Ronnie and Louise married despite her family's disapproval. In fact, the Brigantes cut ties with the couple for a time. That changed on September 26, 1951, when Louise gave birth to their first child, Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr., later known as Butch. The central figure in this case. As a child, Butch faced intense pressure from his father. Big Ronnie demanded perfection and wasn't afraid to use force. One moment, he would embrace his son. The next, he'd throw him across the room. Louise's brother, Michael Brigante Jr., would later testify at trial about witnessing Ronnie violently abuse Butch when he was just 2 years old. Butch also struggled with his weight throughout his early years, often bullied by peers who cruelly called him names like the Blob, Pork Chop, and Bucky Beaver. The DeFeo's family expanded quickly. Louise gave birth to Dawn Teresa DeFeo on July 29, 1956, followed by Allison and Mark DeFeo in 1961 and Gregory DeFeo in 1962. Then, on October 24, 1965, their youngest, John Matthew DeFeo, was born. By this point, the DeFeos had upgraded from their modest Brooklyn apartment to a lavish colonial home in Amityville, Long Island. The house sat right on the water, with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a boathouse. Many wondered how Ronnie, who worked as a service manager at a car dealership, could afford it. The answer: Louise's wealthy father, Michael Brigante Sr., often footed the bill, including a $50,000 expense for life-sized gold-framed family portraits that took over a year to complete. Despite the facade of luxury, turmoil brewed beneath the surface. Butch had become increasingly erratic. Though he was supposed to work at the family-owned auto body shop, he spent most of his time in bars, abusing drugs and alcohol. His behavior grew violent. On one occasion, he even pulled a gun on his father. Then, on the early morning of November 13, 1974, Butch snapped, armed with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. He crept through the house, killing 6 family members, his parents and 4 siblings, as they slept. Incredibly, none of the victims appeared to have awakened or struggled. All were found face down in their beds. Even more chilling, though the rifle didn't have a silencer. No neighbors reported hearing gunshots aside from the family dog's frantic barking. After the murders, Butch calmly took a bath, changed clothes, disposed of the evidence, and went to work as if nothing had happened. Later that day, he reported discovering his family murdered and initially blamed the supposed mafia hitman, Luis Fellini, and 2 accomplices. But this alibi quickly unraveled. Fellini was proven to be out of state at the time. Under police questioning, Butch confessed. He said, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." Some believed he heard voices telling him to kill, but prosecution psychiatrists argued he suffered from antisocial personality disorder, not psychosis. He wasn't possessed or delusional. They claimed he simply had no remorse. In the end, Butch DeFeo was convicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. He remained imprisoned at Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York until his death on March 12, 2021. To this day, some believe a second person may have been involved in the killings, but no one else was ever charged. The aftermath. The Lutz family and the Amityville haunting just over a year after the massacre. The DeFeo home at 112 Ocean Avenue was sold to the Lutz family. George and Kathy Lutz were fully aware of the home's gruesome past, but its beauty and bargain price of $80,000 were too tempting to pass up, though their budget was initially between $30,000 and $50,000. The spacious colonial complete with river access and luxury amenities called to them. They thought they could make it their dream home, but soon, that dream unraveled into a waking nightmare. Over the course of just 28 days, the Lutzes experienced a series of unexplained and terrifying event stories that would go on to inspire books, documentaries, and one of the most iconic horror franchises in history, the Amityville Horror. But that's a story for another night. The Lutz family and the Amityville haunting. The terrifying events experienced by the Lutz family were later shared with the world by author Jay Anson in his best-selling book The Amityville Horror, before moving into the infamous home. George Lutz was a thriving businessman, but shortly after settling in, he began to change. He became distant, irritable, and emotionally cold. Most disturbingly, George found himself waking up at exactly 3:15 a.m. every single night, the same time the DeFeo murders had occurred. One night, George noticed something that left him frozen in fear. His 5-year-old daughter, Missy, was standing at her bedroom window. But what truly sent chills down his spine was the eerie outline of a pig's face, with glowing red eyes staring in from behind her. He rushed to her side, but when he entered the room, Missy was fast asleep, unaware of anything strange. Not long after, Missy began speaking about a new imaginary friend, a pig named Jody. But was Jody really just a product of imagination? In another disturbing moment, George looked at his wife, Kathy, as she slept, only to find her face suddenly transformed, as if she had aged into a frail 90-year-old woman. The transformation came and went, but it was witnessed not only by George. Even Kathy's own mother saw it happen, and the horrors didn't stop there. Doors were ripped off their hinges. In the dead of winter, a room was suddenly filled with flies. Outside, cloven hoofprints appeared in the snow just beyond their front door. Inside, green slime began to ooze from the walls. And then came the most unsettling discovery of Ola's small, hidden room in the basement that didn't appear on the home's original blueprints. The room was painted a deep, oppressive red. It was barely big enough for 2 people to sit inside, and the air carried a rancid, sour odor that never went away. George once tried to bring the family dog into the room, but the animal refused, backing away in fear, tail tucked, whimpering. George had never seen the dog react like that before. Whatever was in that room, it terrified the dog to its core. On another night, George was jolted awake by what sounded like a full band playing downstairs, lively, booming music that echoed through the house. Confused, he went down to the living room, but the second he stepped inside, the music vanished. The room was empty but not untouched. The furniture had been moved. The rug had been rolled back. It looked as though the room had been prepared for a ghostly party. Desperate for answers, the Lutz family reached out to a local priest, asking for a blessing. But as soon as the priest entered the home, he was struck by an intense illness, overcome by nausea and a suffocating pressure in the air. Some unseen force was warning him to leave. These strange encounters went far beyond the Lutz family. Author Jay Anson later said that it was meeting the priest, seeing how genuinely shaken he was, that convinced him the story was more than just folklore. He said, "This wasn't The Exorcist. This wasn't The Omen. This was happening to real people." The Lutz family flees on January 14, 1976. Just 28 days after moving in, the Lutzes experienced something so terrifying, they made a spur-of-a-moment decision. They packed a few essentials, fled the house, and never returned. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, they hadn't planned to leave forever. He explained, "We didn't wake up that morning thinking we were leaving for good. This was our home. We didn't know that we would never see our belongings again, but that's exactly what happened." Their possessions were left behind, frozen in time, and later auctioned off. As reported by the Washington Post in 1979, from tragedy to bestseller, determined to share their story, the Lutz family detailed every terrifying moment to Jay Anson, who transformed their experiences into the Amityville Horror. Published in 1977, the book was an instant success. The Los Angeles Times called it both fascinating and frightening, but not everyone believed. Some critics argued that the book's popularity had less to do with ghosts and more to do with the tense political and economic climate of the late 70s, rising inflation, gas shortages, and job instability. The story of a once stable family torn apart by unseen forces, whether supernatural or financial, resonated with struggling Americans. In blending real-life stress with otherworldly horror, the story struck a nerve. People saw their own fears mirrored in the Lutzes' ordeal. The curse of the manuscript. Jay Anson himself claimed he experienced nothing paranormal while writing the book. In fact, when asked, he simply replied, "Leave it. No." Still, shortly after finishing the manuscript, he suffered a heart attack which he attributed to smoking and poor health rather than any curse. But eerie coincidences began to emerge. Several people who handled early copies of the manuscript reportedly experienced strange and sometimes tragic events. One friend driving the manuscript back to the publisher had a fire break out in his car, but when the trunk was opened, the manuscript inside was completely untouched, dry and unburned. Another person and his son nearly drowned when their car plunged into water. Yet the envelope containing the manuscript was once again bone dry. Most chilling of all, a woman who received just the first 2 chapters of the book died in a house fire that very same night. Among the ruins, the chapters were recovered unscathed. The Amityville Horror on film, the Lutz family's story soon made its way to the big screen. In 1979, the Amityville Horror was released, starring James Brolin, followed by a 2005 remake with Ryan Reynolds as George Lutz. While both films kept the essential elements of the story, the haunting, the family, the DeFeo murders, they also introduced their own creative twists. In the 1979 version, a fictional babysitter is added to the story. In the remake, the horror is intensified with even more disturbing imagery, where the original focused on the house, influencing Ronald DeFeo Jr. to commit murder. The 2005 version shifted the fear to vengeful ghosts of the victims. The portrayal of the priest also changed. In the book, he becomes ill and eventually backs away from helping, but in the films, he's terrorized, attacked by flies, plagued by blinding visions, and ultimately forced to flee. Despite the embellishments, one chilling truth remains. An entire family was murdered in that house. Another family fled in terror, and a story was born, one that continues to haunt the world to this day. If you enjoy deep dives like this into dark, real-life mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I post new cases every week here on Crime Whisper, and I'm always exploring the thin line between truth, fear, and the unexplained. Until next time, sleep safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are real. The deaths of Shinjiro Matsumoto and his 2 children were devastating beyond description, but it was the discovery of Chika Matsumoto's body that shocked investigators the most. The 40-year mother was found unclothed, her body marked with dark bruises, evidence of a brutal assault before her life was violently taken. Once known for her beauty and athleticism, Chica's lifeless form told a story of unimaginable suffering. Her injuries suggested that she, too, had been physically overpowered and subjected to a level of violence that deeply disturbed even the most seasoned forensic experts. Chika Matsumoto's body was so brutally mutilated that she was nearly unrecognizable. Her head had been struck with a blunt object, and the damage to her genital area was severe. What made the scene even more horrifying was the discovery that at least 30 patches of flesh had been removed from her body while she was still alive. Forensic pathologists confirmed this, stating that the injuries were inflicted pre-mortem, suggesting a level of sadism that deeply disturbed everyone involved in the investigation. The extent of torture Chika endured was so extreme that experts compared the killer's method to the ancient Chinese execution practice known as linki, or death by 1,000 cuts, a slow, excruciating form of torment. Her official cause of death was determined to be drowning, but forensic evidence suggested she hadn't drowned in seawater. Instead, investigators theorized she was likely submerged in a bathtub before her body was dumped into the ocean. The sheer brutality of the crime shocked even veteran detectives. It was clear this wasn't just murder, it was calculated, sadistic, and unrelenting. At this point, detectives began to give serious consideration to a theory proposed by Yoshida, the victim's father, that the Matsumoto family had been targeted by loan sharks or members of the criminal underworld as punishment for unpaid debts. Initially, it seemed plausible. Shinjiro Matsumoto had reportedly owed 10 million yen, a substantial amount, but not unpayable, and if he couldn't manage it, Yoshida had the means and willingness to help clear the debt. However, the deeper investigators dug, the more the theory began to unravel. First, the Japanese underworld, though ruthless, tends to follow a strict financial logic. They don't usually kill debtors until they've exhausted all means of repayments, especially not entire families. Murdering a whole household would eliminate any chance of collecting the money. Moreover, traditional Yakuza codes of conduct typically prohibit harming a debtor's wife and children. In Shinjiro's case, the group he borrowed from was known for brutal methods: limb amputation, public humiliation, but never outright murder. There had never been a documented case of a family being slaughtered over unpaid debt. This alone raised serious doubts about the loan shark theory. Then came a strange development. Representatives from the loan group came forward, something almost unheard of. They repeatedly approached the police, adamant that they had no involvement in the killings. Their logic made financial sense. Killing the Matsumotos would leave no one to pay the 10 million yen owed. This bold denial was unexpected, but it aligned with a growing suspicion within the police force this massacre may not have been about money at all. As detectives began piecing things together, a new theory started to take shape, one driven by disturbing new evidence. All 4 victims had been handcuffed and weighed down with objects before being tossed into the sea, an effort to ensure the bodies sank and remained undiscovered. But the killer made a mistake. The binding technique was flawed. Some of the weights came loose, which allowed the bodies to eventually resurface. This crucial error gave investigators a lifeline, and it changed everything. Upon closer inspection, detectives discovered a chilling detail. The handcuffs and weights used to bind the victims weren't ordinary restraints. They were sex toys. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Hakka, the area where the family lived, was not a large city, and there were very few shops that sold such specialty items. This made it relatively easy for police to begin tracking the purchase. And that was just the beginning. DNA analysis uncovered biological evidence inside Chika's genital area believed to be semen from the perpetrator. Additionally, forensic teams found skin flakes lodged beneath her fingernails, indicating that she had fought back fiercely during the assault. Even more shocking, the skin fragments came from 3 different individuals, strongly suggesting that multiple attackers had been involved. Then came another Crucial piece of evidence: fingerprints. Investigators found 7 or 8 unidentified fingerprints scattered throughout the Matsumoto home. After cross-referencing them against known friends, colleagues, and relatives, 3 prints remained unmatched. Their placement around the house suggested they belonged to the perpetrators. Using this trail of physical evidence, police traced the sale of the handcuffs and weights to a small adult store located just over a kilometer from the Matsumoto residence. The store's owner, a man identified only as Mr. A, remembered the customer clearly. He described him as a young man, around 20 years old, who appeared to be a foreigner, possibly Chinese or Korean, due to his heavily accented Japanese and frequent mispronunciations. What stood out to Mr. A was that this customer didn't fit the usual buyer profile. Typically, these items were purchased by middle-aged men, often shopping on behalf of their wives. But this young man had been polite, soft-spoken, even gentle. He didn't look like a killer. Fortunately, the shop had security cameras. The footage captured the young man's visit, and police wasted no time broadcasting the images on national television, hoping the public might recognize him and offer leads. The strategy worked too. Soon after the footage aired, the Fukuoka police received a call from a student who recognized the suspect. The caller identified him as Wang Liang, a 19-year-old student enrolled at a prestigious language school for international students. In Fukuoka, the tip aligned perfectly with what investigators already knew. Wang Liang's Japanese was poor. Just as Mr. A had noted, that detail alone gave weight to the student's identification and made Wang a prime suspect. Detectives immediately began digging into his background. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. Wang Liang was originally from Chongqing, in China's Jilin province. His family was relatively well off and had worked in construction, investing the equivalent of about $26,000 to send their son abroad for education. But Wang's life in Japan had quickly gone off track. He struggled academically, was frequently absent from school, and had a reputation among fellow Chinese students for aggressive behavior and bad company. After repeated altercations, Wang was expelled in May 2003. That expulsion invalidated his student visa under Japanese law, meaning he could no longer legally remain in the country. In late 2002, Wang returned to China, but lied to his family, claiming he was still attending school. Trusting him, they gave him another 190,000 yuan, about $26,000 USD, to support his continued studies. But instead of enrolling in another institution, Wang returned to Japan on June 10, 2003, with no intention of continuing his education. He avoided dormitories to keep his status hidden and instead moved in with a roommate, Yang Ning. That decision would soon prove critical. When investigators attempted to question Wang and Yang, they discovered both had recently vacated the apartment. Alarm bells went off. Police immediately checked immigration records, and what they found confirmed their worst fears. Just 2 days after the Matsumoto family was murdered, on June 20th, both Wang Liang and Yang Ning had boarded a flight back to China. Why would Yang Ning leave everything behind if he hadn't been expelled? He still had a valid visa and no known issues with the school. His sudden disappearance raised serious suspicions, and investigators were now certain this was no coincidence. They weren't looking for one killer. They were hunting a team of murderers. As the investigation intensified, police began to scrutinize Yang Ning's background to see if he had any connection to the brutal murders. What they discovered was shocking. Yang Ning, only 20 years old at the time, came from a very different background than Wang Liang. Although both young men hailed from Changchun, China, Yang came from a relatively privileged family. His father was a mid-level city official. Unlike Wang Liang, who often skipped school and spent his time loitering in the streets of Japan, Yang Ning had initially been focused and responsible. While studying in Japan, he worked part-time at a burger restaurant to support himself, presenting himself as a disciplined and goal-oriented student. The two had known each other since childhood, but their friendship deepened significantly once they both found themselves in Japan. At first, Yang Ning seemed to be a decent, well-behaved young man, but the more time he spent with Wang Liang, the more his demeanor began to shift. Wang Liang was a known troublemaker frequenting bars and red light districts, gambling heavily, and consorting with the Chinese underworld. He was even known to buy sex toys and engage in other illicit activities. Under Wang Liang's influence, Yang Ning was gradually pulled into this dangerous world. He transformed from a quiet, hard-working student into someone who drank, gambled, and began bullying other students alongside Wang Liang. Their reputations began to spiral downward. Still, many of their classmates were in disbelief when rumors of their possible involvement in the murders began to circulate. They couldn't reconcile the idea of the two being involved in something so horrific. But seasoned detectives knew better. They understood how murderers could live double lives, appearing polite and harmless in public, only to reveal a monstrous side when no one was watching. Investigators remained cautious but determined. A major breakthrough came when police searched Yang Ning's former rental apartment. There, they uncovered a chilling cache of forensic evidence, multiple strands of hair and fingerprints, scattered across different objects in the apartment. Forensic analysis revealed something startling: the DNA from skin flakes found beneath Chika Matsumoto's fingernails matched both Wang Liang and Yang Ning. Moreover, fingerprints collected from the apartment were consistent with those found at the Matsumoto family's murder scene. With this evidence, it was now undeniable. Wang Liang and Yang Ning were involved in the brutal killings. While Japanese authorities reached out to Chinese law enforcement to help locate the suspects who had by then fled back to China, the Fukuoka police pressed on with the investigation. There was still one critical question left unanswered. Who was the third person involved? Forensic testing had revealed DNA from 3 individuals under Sika's fingernails, along with a distinct set of unidentified fingerprints at the crime scene. This meant there had to be another accomplice. Attention quickly turned to others, in Wang Liang and Yang Ning's circle. It didn't take long to identify a new suspect, Wei Wei, another international student from China. Originally from Hunan province, Wei Wei was 24 years old, significantly older than the other two. He came from a wealthy family. His parents owned a factory and were respected entrepreneurs back home. Though his academic record was average, he took his studies seriously. After completing his mandatory military service, his family arranged for him to study abroad in Japan in 2001. Initially, Wei Wei lived a quiet and disciplined life. He rarely missed class or left early unless he had a valid reason. But in the months leading up to the murder, his behavior changed. He began skipping school, citing poor health, work obligations, or stress. Other Chinese international students noted that about 6 months before the crime, he had grown unusually close to Wang Liang and Yang Ning. This was no casual friendship. Wei Wei, who had trained in martial arts during his military service and even won provincial competitions, began teaching Wang Liang how to fight. Though Wang had a reputation for getting into brawls, he often came out worse for wear, so it made sense that he'd seek out someone like Wei for training. The trio began spending more time together, especially in shady bars known to be controlled by the Chinese underworld. While Wang and Yang enjoyed the chaos of the nightlife, for Wei Wei, things had taken a darker turn. His once stable family back in China had fallen into financial trouble, and the sudden loss of privilege affected him deeply. Bitter and disillusioned, Wei Wei began drinking heavily and growing increasingly resentful. His descent into destructive behavior soon crossed into criminality. In March 2003, just months before the Matsumoto murders, Wei Wei and another Chinese National committed a robbery stealing 260,000 yuan from two fellow students as they exited an internet cafe. The victims, knowing Wei personally, didn't report the crime out of fear of retaliation. Not long after, in June, a female international student accused Wei of violently assaulting her over a minor disagreement. With this growing trail of violent behavior, police became convinced that Wei was the likely third accomplice in the Matsumoto murders. Acting swiftly, the Fukuoka police launched an emergency operation. One key discovery was that Wei had no record of exiting Japan, meaning he was still in the country. Authorities imposed an immediate exit ban and launched a nationwide manhunt, but Wei was already a step ahead. He vanished, abandoning his apartment and disappearing without a trace. 2 months later, in August, there was finally a break in the case. At a convenience store in an airport, Wei got into a heated argument with staff over a payment dispute. Patrol officers nearby noticed the commotion and intervened. Upon seeing them, Wei panicked and ran, prompting the officers to call for backup. Despite his martial arts training, he couldn't outrun the police. A search of his belongings revealed a plane ticket he had planned to fly to Shanghai within the hour. After his arrest, Wei proved to be a tough nut to crack. He refused to answer questions, remaining cold and silent. But police obtained a DNA sample and the results were conclusive. His DNA matched the third profile found under Chica's fingernails. Even with this damning evidence, Wei refused to speak about the whereabouts of Wang Liang and Yang Ning. Without their capture, determining who had masterminded the attack was impossible. Japanese authorities relied heavily on Chinese police to track down the two fugitives, but the Japanese press remained skeptical. Many believed the men would vanish into the shadows, perhaps even assume false identities and remain undetected for years. But then, against all odds, a tip came in. 2 months after the escape, a man in Liaoning province, China, contacted police about a new coworker who had been acting strangely. The man flaunted his wealth, spending lavishly and making bold, drunken claims. During one such rant, he allegedly bragged about murdering an entire family. Chinese police moved in swiftly and detained the suspect. He was visibly distressed, his hands trembled, his face pale. At the station, he collapsed and kept asking if he could get a lighter sentence in exchange for a full confession. It didn't take long for him to admit that he was Wang Liang. Unlike Wei, Wang was cooperative. He quickly gave up Yang Ning's location, leading to his immediate arrest. With all 3 suspects now in custody, the full truth began to emerge. Wei eventually opened up, revealing how he had fallen into crime. He recounted how he first met Wang and Yang while trying to earn a living abroad. Initially a law-abiding student, Wei was gradually pulled into criminal activity due to his family's financial desperation. As his parents grew increasingly insistent that he send money home, and as his own resources ran dry, he began to listen more closely to Wang and Yang, who frequently boasted about their petty thefts and scams. At first, he dismissed their stories as juvenile and reckless, but eventually, he broke. One evening, Wang and Yang took him to a fast food restaurant where Yang Ning used to work. They asked him to stay outside while they went in. Moments later, they emerged, laughing, carrying bags full of stolen cash. The police began digging deeper into Yang Ning's background to determine if he had any links to the crime. What they uncovered was shocking. Yang Ning, just 20 years old, came from a very different background than Wang Len, though he was also from Changchun, Jilin, China. His family was well off. His father held a mid-level position in the local city government. Unlike Wang Leng, who frequently skipped school and roamed the streets of Japan, Yang Ning had once been focused and responsible. He worked part-time at a burger restaurant to support himself. The 2 young men had known each other since childhood in China, but their friendship deepened after both arrived in Japan. Initially, Yang Ning appeared to be a decent, hard-working young man. But the more time he spent with Wang Lang, the more he began to change. Wang Lang, a known troublemaker, frequently gambled, drank, and visited red light districts and shady bars affiliated with the Chinese underworld. He engaged in illegal activities and often bought sex toys, leading a reckless lifestyle. Eventually, Yang Ning was drawn into this same dangerous world. Yang went from being a disciplined student to someone who drank, gambled, and even bullied others, alongside Wang Len, despite their bad reputations. Many classmates couldn't believe they were capable of something as horrific as murder, but the police knew better. They understood that people often led double lives, appearing friendly and harmless, yet capable of extreme violence. Determined not to overlook any possibilities, the police investigated further. At Yang Ning's former rental apartment in Fukuoka, they made a chilling discovery: multiple hair samples and fingerprints. Forensic analysis confirmed the unthinkable. The DNA from skin flakes found under Chika Matsumoto's nails matched both Wang Lang and Yang Ning. In addition, fingerprints at the crime scene matched those found in Yang Ning's apartment. The evidence was clear. Wang Lang and Yang Ning were directly involved in the brutal murder of the Matsumoto family. The police turned to Chinese authorities for help, as the two had fled Japan and returned to their hometowns. But one key question remained: who was the third person involved? Investigators had found DNA from a third individual under Chika's nails, along with additional fingerprints not belonging to Wang or Yang. It was clear a third accomplice had helped commit the murders. Police soon identified a new suspect: Wei Wei, a 24-year-old international student from China's Hunan province. Unlike the other two, Wei Wei came from an affluent family. His parents were respected entrepreneurs who owned a successful factory. Although his academic performance was average, Wei Wei took his studies seriously. After completing his mandatory military service, he moved to Japan in 2001 to study. Wei Wei had a clean record until recently. He rarely skipped classes or caused trouble, unless he had a legitimate reason. However, in the months leading up to the crime, his behavior shifted. He began missing classes, citing reasons like illness, part-time jobs, or mental stress. According to other Chinese international students, Wei Wei suddenly became close friends with Wang Lang and Yang Ning roughly 6 months before the murders. This new bond wasn't innocent. Having trained in martial arts and won several provincial competitions, Wei Wei began teaching Wang how to fight. Wang was often involved in fights and eagerly took advantage of the training. The trio frequented bars linked to the Chinese underworld and indulged in heavy drinking and partying. But for Wei Wei, things took a darker turn. His once wealthy family was facing financial hardship, and he was unable to cope with the dramatic change in lifestyle. Filled with bitterness and resentment, he spiraled into destructive behavior. In March 2003, Wei Wei and another Chinese student robbed 2 individuals leaving an internet cafe, stealing 260,000 yen. Although the victims knew Wei Wei, they didn't report him, possibly fearing retaliation. Then, just months before the murder, Wei Wei allegedly assaulted a female international student over a minor dispute. The police were now convinced Wei Wei was the third accomplice in the Matsumoto murders. A manhunt was launched. The government issued an emergency exit ban and searched his last known addresses, but Wei Wei had already disappeared. 2 months later, in August, a major break came. At an airport convenience store, Wei Wei got into an argument with the staff over a payment issue. Patrol officers were called to intervene. Wei Wei, realizing he was being recognized, panicked and fled. He was quickly apprehended. A search of his belongings revealed a plane ticket. He was scheduled to fly to Shanghai within the hour. Despite his martial arts background, Wei Wei was no match for the authorities. Once in custody, he refused to speak, but forensic testing told the story. His DNA matched the third set found under Sika's nails. confirming his involvement. Still, the case wasn't closed. The whereabouts of Wang and Yang remained unknown. Frustrated by Wei Wei's silence, investigators turned to Chinese authorities for assistance, but many in Japan doubted the fugitives would ever be found. Then, a surprising twist. Just 2 months after returning to China, a man in Liaoning province reported a suspicious co-worker who constantly flaunted his wealth and during a drunken rant, confessed to murdering a family. The man was arrested and quickly broke down, pleading for leniency and admitting he was Wang Ling. He also revealed Yang Ning's location, leading to Yang's arrest. With all 3 suspects in custody, the full story began to unfold. Wei finally spoke, explaining how he had met Wang and Yang while struggling to support himself in Japan. At first, he dismissed their criminal behavior as foolish, but when his family's financial demands grew unbearable, he gave in. One night, Wang and Yang robbed a restaurant where Yang had previously worked. They handed Wei 700,000 yen as his charan offer. He reluctantly accepted. The thrill of that easy money hooked him. The next night, the trio targeted a teacher's dormitory, stealing another 50,000 yen. Despite the small reward, Wei felt empowered by the success. Over the next 6 months, his descent into crime deepened. He ran scams, stole from fellow students, and even used violence when needed, though he was briefly detained for an assault. It didn't deter him. Then came the night that would change everything. On June 19, 2003, the trio set out to rob a wealthy family, Shinjiro Matsumoto, his wife Chika, and their 2 children. Armed with handcuffs and knives, they broke into the home. Chika was alone with the children. Her husband was still at work. Their original plan to rob the house quickly unraveled. Overcome by panic and emotion, the group restrained Chika and decided to eliminate all witnesses. Tragically, this meant murdering the entire family. As they searched for valuables, Matsumoto returned home unexpectedly. They overpowered him as well and continued their search, but found only 40,000 yen, barely enough to justify their horrific actions. To destroy evidence, the group cleaned the scene thoroughly, loaded the bodies into the family's stolen Mercedes-Benz, and dumped them into the sea under the cover of darkness. But the very next day, police launched an investigation, triggering a wave of panic in the killers. Wei considered fleeing, but feared returning home in disgrace, believing he might receive a lighter sentence as an accomplice. He decided to stay in Japan. In 2005, Yang Ning was sentenced to death and executed swiftly. Wang Ling received a life sentence for his cooperation in helping capture Yang. Wei, however, continued to fight the charges. During his trial, he claimed he only went along to help friends and never intended to kill. The court rejected this defense, and he too was sentenced to death. He filed 2 appeals. Both were denied. The court ruled his crimes were equally severe. In Japan, death sentences require the justice minister's signature, and executions are infrequent. For 16 years, Wei remained on death row, reflecting on his life. His mother and sister visited him regularly, but his father never did. Wei assumed it was due to shame, only later learning that his father had fallen seriously ill. As years passed, Wei's outlook changed. Anger gave way to deep remorse. He acknowledged the pain he had caused, and expressed willingness to accept death if it brought comfort to the victim's loved ones. In 2019, his execution was officially confirmed, though justice was served. The pain left behind by the Matsumoto murders will never truly fade. Victor had tried other ways to deal with the devil, but nothing worked. Frustrated and desperate, he came up with a new plan. He would shoot the devil out of the sky. On May 27, 1966, his mother, Stella, found him in their backyard, rifle in hand, firing bullets into the air. He had already pulled the trigger 3 times before she could stop him. Horrified and confused, Stella demanded to know what he was doing. Victor's answer chilled her to the bone. "I shot the devil." Terrified, Stella begged him to come back inside, eventually managing to calm him down. Victor put the rifle away, but soon after, he took the family car and sped off. While he was gone, the family scrambled to hide every single firearm in the house. When Victor returned, he asked for the guns back, insisting no one would get hurt. The family refused. Agitated, he left again, only to return a short while later, this time asking to speak to their pastor. The pastor came, and the two spoke privately. Stella couldn't make out much of what was being said, but when they stepped outside, she caught Victor's voice. "I'd like to kill my mom." That was the breaking point. Stella and her husband Robert realized they couldn't wait any longer. The next day, they arranged to have Victor admitted to the Saskatchewan hospital. For those unfamiliar, Saskatchewan Hospital in 1967 wasn't known for compassionate care. It was a large mental institution in North Battleford, Canada, where patients were often locked away and sedated rather than truly treated. Recovery wasn't the goal, containment was. When Victor underwent his initial psychiatric evaluation, doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia, severe and unmistakable. He didn't fight the admission. He even voluntarily agreed to commit himself. Maybe part of him believed it was the safest option for everyone, including himself. Medical records showed Victor was far from stable. He would often talk to himself, laugh for no reason, and struggle with his identities, sometimes questioning whether he was male or female. He was vague, emotionally flat, and often withdrawn. He told his siblings he saw the devil. They laughed at him, but to Victor, it wasn't funny. He believed the devil was punishing him because he'd refused to sell his soul. It didn't stop there. He even believed someone else's brain belonging to a girl named Denise had been put into his head. She, he claimed, was trying to take over. Doctors labeled all this delusion, but to Victor, it was very real. He believed he had touched both angels and the devil. Eventually, though, Victor figured out that if he kept talking about these things, he'd never get out. So he began trying to convince himself it was all in his head. He wanted to get better, wanted to escape the fear, the chaos. Doctors began his treatment. 12 rounds of electroconvulsive therapy, tranquilizers, occupational therapy, supportive psychotherapy. By the end, doctors believed he had accepted that his experiences with the devil were imaginary. He seemed calmer, more stable, even cheerful at times, though still quiet and withdrawn. But there was a darker truth. His violent thoughts hadn't gone away. Victor openly admitted that he still had urges to kill for no reason other than he wanted to. He fantasized about killing his family and others around him. Even with this admission, the doctors remained optimistic. They assured his father that, with another year or two of therapy, Victor would be just fine. So, on July 26, 1967, Victor was discharged and sent home back to his father, along with a prescription for tranquilizers. The plan was simple. The meds would keep him calm, but life at home wasn't so simple. Victor struggled to readjust to life on the farm. The tranquilizers made him sluggish, too tired to do farm work, and his back constantly ached. The frustration mounted. By August 8th, Victor had enough. He stopped taking the medication. At first, nothing changed, but within days, something inside him began to shift. On the morning of August 11th, he woke up with a terrible feeling, not just dread, a premonition. He couldn't explain it, but he believed something was coming. He told himself he'd either end up in jail or back in the hospital. And to Victor, being locked away again was worse than death. The hospital, to him, had been a prisoner place where no one understood what was happening in his mind. He began to believe he had a gift, what he called visions, not dreams, not fantasies, prophecies. He claimed these visions had followed him his entire life and came every single day. And after each one, he felt the same thing, the urge to kill. He believed that by acting on this urge, he'd finally prove to the devil that he was no longer afraid. Then came August 14th. Victor's day began normally. He worked on the tractor, tired himself out, and fell asleep on the sofa around 9:30 p.m. A few hours later, his parents woke him up and asked him to go to bed. He obeyed, but woke again around 3 a.m., restless and unable to sleep. He went to the garage, hoping work would distract him. But the feeling wouldn't go away. As he paced back and forth, something strange happened. He felt a surge of bizarre sensation on the side of his head. It wasn't painful, but almost euphoric. He later described it as if something had split his body in two and left him. In that moment, all his fear vanished. In its place was a powerful, unstoppable urge to kill. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his .22 Browning pump-action repeater rifle, loaded it, and made up his mind. He had a plan, and he was ready to carry it out. Victor had a simple morning routine. He'd get in his car, drive around for an hour or so, scan the woods and fields near his home, and look for small animal squirrels, mostly living among the spruce trees surrounding the farm. But that particular morning felt different. He drove for what seemed like forever, yet saw no squirrels, no movement, no life. Most people would take that as a sign to head home, but not Victor. Something deeper, darker kept him going. The urge to kill was rising inside him, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. He wasn't just hunting animals anymore. He was looking for something or someone to satisfy. The growing storm of frustration and rage. As the sky lightened around 6 a.m., Victor came upon a modest farmhouse. It didn't stand out from the dozens of homes he'd passed, but something about it made him stop. He felt drawn to it like it was calling to him. This farmhouse, tragically, belonged to the Peterson family, who lived in Shell Lake, Saskatchewan, about 40 miles from Victor's own home in Leask. The Petersons were nothing like Victor. Their lives were filled with love, hard work, and laughter. James Peterson, the father, was a kind and well-respected man who had served in World War II. After the war, he returned home, bought 328 acres, and became a mixed grain and cattle farmer. When his own father retired, James added another 72 acres to his workload. Like many families in rural Canada at the time, the Petersons were large. James and his wife Evelyn had 9 children: Kathy, 19, Jean, 17, Mary, 13, Dorothy, 11, Pearl, 9, Phyllis, 4, William, 5, Colin, 2, and Larry, just 1 year old. Kathy, the eldest, had recently married and moved to British Columbia, but the rest of the family remained at home in their 4-room farmhouse. The children all shared one bedroom, while baby Larry slept with his parents. Despite the cramped quarters and financial challenges, the Petersons were happy. They were known for being polite, hard-working, and well-liked by their neighbors. James and Evelyn devoted their lives to their children. Their daughter Jean had shown promise as an athlete, and the family had been working to send her to a track camp in Dundon to help cover the cost. James called on his neighbor, Will Druniak, to help haul 50 bushels of hay to the grain elevator. The following morning, August 15th, 1967. That same morning, Victor's internal turmoil reached a breaking point. According to later court testimony, the voices in his head became deafening. They urged him to act, to go to that farmhouse, to kill. When Victor stepped inside the Peterson home, he was struck by an eerie familiarity. He claimed later that he recognized the kitchen, despite never having been there before. It was as if he had seen it in a dream. Then James appeared, startled to see a stranger inside. Acting on pure instinct, James lunged at Victor to protect his family. But Victor was faster. He pulled out his gun and shot James 7 times. Then he walked outside to reload and collect himself. That's when he saw Evelyn attempting to escape through a window, holding baby Larry in her arms. Without hesitation, he shot her, leaving her lifeless in the yard. Victor re-entered the house, where the children were still sleeping. He moved from bed to bed, killing Jean, Mary, Dorothy, Pearl, William, and Colin, as they lay helpless. The horror didn't end there. He returned to where Evelyn's body lay and killed baby Larry too. Later, he would claim it was an act of mercy, reasoning that a 1-year-old couldn't survive without his parents. His twisted logic continued, with James dead. He believed no witnesses could be left behind. He picked up shell casings from the floor and tried to remove any evidence that could tie him to the crime. By 7:30 a.m., Victor returned to his parents' home, shaken and sickened by what he had done. He spent the day wrestling with guilt and confusion, but the horror he'd unleashed had already begun to ripple outward. Meanwhile, Wildruniak arrived at the Peterson farm around 9 a.m. to help James. But the house was oddly quiet. He called out, joking that James might have overslept. When no one responded, Will stepped inside and froze. James's body was on the kitchen floor. Will turned and ran, driving 4 miles to the nearest phone to alert authorities. Police arrived swiftly and searched the farmhouse. The scene was gruesome. The killings were precise and intentional. There was no sign of robbery, and nothing appeared disturbed. They recovered 28 bullets, 27 of which had found their targets. Boot prints were found on the kitchen's linoleum, but none matched anything in the house. They also recovered 5 shell casings, indicating a .22 caliber weapon had been used. Just as investigators were combing the crime scene, a faint noise interrupted the silence. Officers traced the sound to one of the children's beds. There, hidden beneath the sheets, wedged between the bodies of her sisters, was 4-year-old Phyllis. She was the only survivor. Phyllis didn't fully understand what had happened, but she remembered the officer who carried her out was crying. It was then she knew something truly terrible had happened. Her survival was nothing short of miraculous. The Peterson massacre sent shockwaves through Shell Lake and beyond. Phyllis was taken to her uncle's home, while Kathy returned from British Columbia to care for her surviving sister. The police launched an enormous investigation. Roadblocks were set up. Over 250 volunteers and search dogs combed the land for days but found nothing. 4 days later, a breakthrough came. A concerned local resident from Lisk visited the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and he urged them to investigate the son of his neighbor, a young man recently discharged from a psychiatric hospital, known to have a deep fascination with guns and hunting. That man was Victor Hoffman. Investigators followed the tip. When they questioned Victor's parents, the puzzle pieces started to come together. They searched the Hoffman home and found a rifle and a pair of rubber boots. Both were sent for analysis. The results were damning. The boots matched the prints at the crime scene, and the rifle matched the bullets recovered at the Peterson home. It wasn't long before Victor Hoffman was arrested. There was enough evidence to make an arrest. Victor Hoffman was formally charged with the murders. He was a man of average build, quiet in demeanor, and strangely calm. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he surrendered without incident. What made the arrest even more shocking was its timing. It came just 3 hours after the funeral for the Peaton family. Victor confessed in full detail. He claimed that the devil had instructed him to carry out the killings. But the most unsettling part of his confession came when investigators asked why he spared Phyllis, the sole survivor. Victor said he let her live because she had the face of an angel. As for the others, he simply said he didn't respect them. Rather than being placed in a regular prison, Victor was sent to a nearby mental hospital for further evaluation. Doctors once again diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, an illness that had gone tragically untreated for years. Despite this, the court ruled that Victor was competent to stand trial. His defense team argued that the crime would never have occurred had his mental illness been properly managed. They maintained that his untreated condition was central to the tragedy. After 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, their decision was influenced by something unexpected: Victor's mental state. A defense expert had provided a logical, detailed explanation of how Victor's delusions and paranoia had warped his sense of reality. The jury believed that in his mind, Victor genuinely thought he was acting out of necessity, although Victor avoided a traditional prison sentence. He wasn't given an easy way out. The judge committed him to an institution for the criminally insane. The verdict seemed to numb Victor completely. He showed no emotion, simply staring straight ahead as if the reality of his fate hadn't registered. He was transferred to a secure facility in southern Ontario, where he remained for the rest of his life. In December 2001, he was briefly granted supervised access to nearby towns, but that small measure of freedom didn't last. Victor Hoffman would never walk free again. On May 21, 2004, he died of cancer while still in custody, but the pain he caused didn't die with him. Kathy, the sister of one of the victims, took on the unimaginable task of raising young Phyllis, only survivor of the massacre. She brought Phyllis into her home and raised her alongside her own children, giving her a second chance at life after unthinkable trauma. Eventually, Kathy and her husband left the farm and moved to a nearby town after their family farmhouse burned down. But even with the passage of time, both Kathy and Phyllis continued to carry the emotional weight of that night. Phyllis, once a bright little girl, found it hard to blend in. People looked at her differently, and the shadow of her past seemed to follow her everywhere. In a 2004 interview, Phyllis reflected on her struggles. It was always hard to adjust, always feeling like I didn't fit in until I had my son. Then I kind of had to come back. The Piton family murders became known as one of the most horrifying random mass killings in Canadian history, second only to the Porto Peak massacre in 2020, where 22 innocent lives were lost. The insanity ruling in Victor's case continues to spark debate. It raises questions we may never fully answer. Yes, mental illness can deeply distort reality, but does that make such violence more understandable, more forgivable? At the end of the day, no innocent life should ever be lost, regardless of the perpetrator's state of mind. And the tragic truth is this: none of it would have happened if Victor hadn't been released from the mental hospital in the first place. Case 4. They lived together in a quiet townhouse. It was late on a Wednesday night when police entered that home and discovered 6 people dead. Among them was 35-year-old Dharani Dilanta, Ann, and her 4 young children. Danushka Wickramasinghe lived in the Ottawa suburb of Bearhaven, back in Sri Lanka. He had worked at a mobile communications company, but left in July 2021 to pursue higher education in Canada. After arriving, he built a modest life and had recently started his own cleaning company. He spent several lonely years establishing himself before finally reuniting with his wife, Dharani, a schoolteacher, and their 3 children. Months later, their youngest daughter, Kelly, was born in Ottawa. The family was finally whole. It was a familiar story. A man leaves home to chase a better future, hoping to bring his family over once he's built a foundation. Danushka had done just that, and when his family joined him in Canada, their home overflowed with love, joy, and hope. But life had other plans. Their reunion was short-lived. On March 6, 2024, tragedy struck. What should have been an ordinary evening became the worst mass killing in Ottawa's history. That night, the peace of their home was shattered by unimaginable violence. Laughter was replaced with silence, a silence that screamed loss. The victims were Dharani Dilanta Ann, 35 Inuka Wickramasinghe, 7 San Aswini Wickramasinghe. For daughter, Wickramasinghe. The daughter, Kelly Wickramasinghe. Just 2.5 months old. Gamini Emerasinghe, 40, a family acquaintance. Only one person survived Danushka Wick. He was found outside the home, crying for help, bleeding, and severely injured. He was rushed to the hospital and remained in serious but stable condition. Investigators later revealed that Gamini, the 6th deceased, was a recent arrival from Sri Lanka. He was staying with the family as he got settled in Canada. Dharani had been a student at Maladeva Balika Vidyalaya and an alumna of the University of Colombo. Before moving to Canada, she had worked at St. Benedict Model School in Panapisha. Her mother, Janta, on 66, remembers her final conversation with Dharani the night of the killings. They spoke every evening from across the world, Dharani in Ottawa, her mother back in Panapisha, Sri Lanka. But that Wednesday, their call lasted only 5 minutes. It was brief, off. Something didn't feel right. Dharani had told her mother to go to bed early. The next day, when Janta didn't hear from her daughter, her worry deepened. The following morning, she saw a news report about a Sri Lankan family murdered in Ottawa. Deep down, she knew. She didn't need confirmation. She later said, "My daughter, my son Nanel, and their 3 beautiful children all gone. They came to Canada for work, for education, for a better life." The tragedy has left the local community shattered and Sri Lanka in mourning. This was not just a domestic tragedy. It was a national wound. The Wickrame Singh family had risked everything to start fresh. And in the end, they were stolen by something no one saw coming. Dharani was a devoted Buddhist who rejected the pull of materialism, according to Miss AIC. Before leaving for Canada, she donated piles of her belongings to another family affected by a flood. More recently, she asked her mother to give away a child's bicycle she had left behind. After immigrating, she was a kind, loving, and peaceful young lady, Miss AIC said. She looked after her parents and her children with equal devotion. While age doesn't always equate to wisdom, youth doesn't always equal innocence. In the aftermath of the Wickrame Singh family tragedy, many assumed the murders must have been committed by a much older individual, someone holding a grudge, or perhaps an intoxicated guest acting in a moment of grief-fueled madness. Tragically, that wasn't the case. The person responsible for the brutal slaying of 6 innocent people was a 19-year-old boy, Febrio Dawa, someone whom Danushka Wickrame Singh had generously taken into his home. Danushka had first met Febrio while studying at Algonquin College. Initially, they lived in the same boarding house. When Febrio was later asked to vacate his accommodations by the landlord, Danushka stepped in, offering him shelter in the basement of his family's home. Just a few months before the attack, Febrio had an online presence, known for uploading Minecraft gameplay videos to YouTube. Following the attack, his channel was terminated. A spokesperson from Google, YouTube's parent company, confirmed that their trust and safety team took action in line with their creator responsibility guidelines. If a user's off-platform behavior harms the YouTube community, we may take action, they stated, behind the mask. The alleged murderer was an unassuming 19-year-old Sri Lankan national and former student of Algonquin College. He now faces 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Shockingly, it was revealed that the family had even celebrated Febrio's birthday just months before, buying him a cheesecake because he mentioned he liked it. Danushka had even met Febrio's parents back in Sri Lanka on the night of the tragedy. Danushka returned home around 10:30 p.m. He found Febrio inside the house holding a knife. According to Suman Arathana, resident monk and director of the Hilda Jaywardene Buddhist Monastery, Danushka tried to disarm him and was immediately attacked. The police later described the weapon used as knife-like. Danushka suffered slash wounds to his face, stab wounds to his chest and back, and had at least 1 finger severed. Blood was everywhere. Inside, his entire family, including a visiting friend, was already dead. During the assault, Danushka pleaded with Febrio not to harm his family and asked what he had done to deserve this. Febrio simply replied, "Nothing, a lie." Realizing what had happened, Danushka locked himself in a room, paralyzed by fear and grief. Eventually, he ran outside, screaming and bleeding. Neighbors quickly contacted emergency services. Police arrived around 10:52 p.m. and subdued the suspect shortly before 11 o'clock p.m. At 11:17 p.m., Ottawa police released a public statement on social media. urging residents to avoid the 300 block of Bargain Drive due to an ongoing police operation. Hours later, around 2:30 a.m. on March 7th, another statement confirmed a homicide investigation involving multiple victims. One person had been hospitalized with serious but non-life-threatening injuries, and a suspect was in custody. They assured the public there was no ongoing threat. By 6:15 a.m., police issued a press release stating the homicide unit was investigating the deaths of 6 individuals. At 1:30 p.m., during a press conference, the victims were officially identified. The police confirmed the weapon used was an edged object, likely a knife. "This was a senseless act of violence," said Ottawa Police Chief Eric Stubbs. "The victims were purely innocent people." Bainey Sun, another resident monk at the Hilda Jaywardene Monastery, said all was not well with Febrio. He had dropped out of school and was reportedly struggling with suicidal thoughts. Algonquin College later confirmed he had last attended in the winter 2023 semester. In an interview, Febrio's aunt said she was stunned by the news. "The family was so kind to him," she said tearfully. She described her nephew as a quiet, young man and a good student. Dineshka had even invited him to live with them after bringing his own family to Canada. Febrio had initially stayed with other relatives in Ottawa, but later distanced himself, blocking their calls and social media accounts. His actions suggested a growing desire for isolation, even from the only family he had in the country since the murders. Speculation has swirled online, and in some media circles ranging from mental health theories to superstitions like curses. Others have cited visa issues, gaming influence, or mysterious motives. However, police have yet to determine a clear motive. None of the charges against Febrio have been proven in court. At the time of the murders, the family's landlord, Harjit Shabra, was on his way to the airport for a family vacation in Mexico, hoping to help his wife recover from the recent death of her sister. The call he received from police left him in disbelief. He said he was unaware the family had welcomed another person, Febrio, into the home, or that they had even had a newborn. Chabra, a mortgage agent, had leased the Barhaven townhouse to the Wickramasinghe family the previous summer. He described Danishka as a kind, respectful tenant who always paid rent on time and maintained the property well. He was heartbroken over the loss, describing it as unimaginable. Another victim, Gamini Amarasinghe, 40, was a family acquaintance. He had arrived in Canada just 2 months prior and was staying with the Wickramasinghes while trying to settle in. He left behind a wife and 2 children in Sri Lanka. His Facebook profile identified him as a sales and digital marketing consultant who operated a business called VIP Air Tours, promoting Sri Lanka as a travel destination. His last public post, dated February 20th, was a thank you message for birthday wishes. On March 28th, Febrio made a brief court appearance by phone. He stated his name and birth date and confirmed his next court date. He had no prior criminal history in Canada. At that hearing, his lawyer noted they had already received a substantial amount of case disclosure. Febrio's next court appearance was scheduled for April 18th. Judicial proceedings and legal background. Febrio's judicial pretrial was scheduled for April 17th. As part of the court's conditions, he was ordered to have no contact whatsoever with several witnesses, including the sole surviving family member, the grieving husband and father. At a previous court appearance, on March 14th, Doe's lawyer, Yan Little, confirmed that his client was currently in protective custody. There was no video link available for that hearing, so Doe's presence was limited to audio only. Little told the court he had received a significant amount of evidence from the Crown so far, and was actively engaging with the Crown Attorney's office regarding further disclosure. The case was being handled by Crown Attorney Louise Tanney, a seasoned prosecutor with substantial experience handling complex cases involving children. During the hearing, Little also noted that he had been in contact with Doe's family, who were reportedly deeply distressed. However, he declined to reveal their location, only stating that they did not live in Sri Lanka. When asked whether his client would undergo a psychiatric evaluation, Little indicated that a mental health assessment would likely take place, but not for several more months. He declined to comment on Doe's mental condition, citing that he had only interacted with him via video calls, not in person. At that point, there were no plans to pursue bail. Legal experts predicted that Fabio Doe's case could take years to make its way through the justice system. Daphne Gilbert, a professor of criminal law at the University of Ottawa, estimated the process could take anywhere from 2 to 3 years due to various preliminary considerations, including whether Doe is mentally fit to stand trial. According to her, the first step would likely involve a series of psychiatric evaluations to assess Doe's capacity to endure trial proceedings. Sylvia Rich, another legal professor from the same university, noted that under Canadian law, trials are expected to conclude within 30 months or 2.5 years from the date charges are filed. If Fabio Doe is deemed fit to stand trial, his lawyer could potentially invoke a defense of not criminally responsible due to a mental disorder. However, the investigation into the March 6th killings remains both lengthy and complex. Authorities are still trying to piece together crucial details: how the accused came to be in the house, his connection to the family, and his state of mind. While the legal system aims to wrap such cases within 30 months, the actual timeline could vary depending on caseloads, forensic analysis, and other procedural bottlenecks. In the meantime, Fabio Doe is expected to remain in custody. A community in mourning the murder of the Wickramasinghe family, who had only recently immigrated to Ottawa from Sri Lanka, shattered not only their immediate community, but the nation as a whole on a cold, rainy Saturday morning. A memorial vigil was held outside Manor Park Public School, where 7-year-old Anuka Wickramasinghe was a student. Among the tributes was a handmade card from Annika's classmates, its colorful letters beginning to smudge in the drizzle. Children gathered to remember their friend. They described Anuka as fast, kind, intelligent, imaginative, good friend, and a passionate soccer player. "We'll miss your smile," one child said softly, as Annika's teacher, clearly overcome with emotion, placed his own card among the growing pile of flowers, candles, and stuffed animals. The vigil was held in memory of Anuka, his mother Dharani, Delantha, his sisters Ashwini and Kelly, and their family friend, Gami M. More than 100 mourners attended the March 17th funeral, one of the largest in recent Ottawa history, for a family homicide. A Buddhist monk, Venerable Ajahn Batimo, urged the grieving community to channel their grief into compassion and support, rather than despair. The ceremony was deeply emotional. Danushka Wickramasinghe, the sole survivor and husband of Dharani, wept as he stood in prayer, one finger still bandaged from the attack. He was surrounded by sobbing family members and friends. 5 coffins were placed at the front of the room, 3 small white ones and 2 larger wooden caskets. One held framed photos of Dharani and her youngest child. The funeral also included audio, tributes from loved ones in Sri Lanka who couldn't attend. It featured Buddhist rituals and interfaith prayers for healing and strength. Government dignitaries across multiple levels attended to pay their respects. Danushka Wickramasinghe later issued a statement, describing the anguish of losing his entire family and close friend in such a senseless act. He expressed deep gratitude to first responders and hospital staff who helped him through the trauma, and thanked the Sri Lankan community in Ottawa and the wider public for their support. A global response of solidarity as Danushka grappled with the unimaginable. The community stepped in to help. A GoFundMe page was launched to support him and the extended family, both in Canada and Sri Lanka. With an initial goal of $200,000, the fundraiser quickly gained traction. By March 11th, nearly $162,000 had already been raised from over 1,100 donors. It was organized by 20 members of the Buddhist Congress of Canada, coordinated through the local temple. One donor, Annalie Fernando, a Sri Lankan Canadian resident of Ottawa, gave $1,000, though she didn't personally know the victims. Her mother told her that the victims were connected to family friends. It just hit too close to home, she said. Empathy amid devastation, and one of the most heartbreaking details to emerge. Danushka Wickramasinghe, while still recovering in hospital, reportedly expressed compassion for his family's alleged killer, Febrio Du. Despite his visible injuries and exhaustion, he managed to smile when visited by members of his community. A resident monk of the temple placed his hands on Danushka to offer strength, and those present described how, even in his broken state, he showed remarkable grace and empathy toward the man accused of destroying his world. A mystery that still haunts. What remains most unsettling is how little is known about Febrio Du. His parents have refused to disclose where they live. No classmates, friends, or acquaintances have stepped forward to share anything about him. His background, motivations, and mental state remain largely a mystery. While some believe that enough has been revealed, others are demanding answers. Why would a 19-year-old still legally, a teenager, brutally murder an entire family, including 4 small children? This mass killing has left behind not just grief and horror, but lingering questions and fears. Some immigrants now wonder whether opening their doors to strangers might put them at risk. Others worry the incident might cause Canadian authorities to tighten immigration protocols even further. One thing is clear: the truth behind the Wickramasinghe family murders is far from fully uncovered, and justice, though underway, remains a long road ahead. Case 5. James Craig Kailerin. The surface: James Craig Kailer was living the American dream. With a 6-figure salary and a stable upward climbing career, he appeared to be the perfect provider. His wife Karen seemed every bit the ideal homemaker and supermom, nurturing their 3 children, Emily, Lauren, and Sean, with boundless energy. From honor roll accolades to athletic achievements, the Kailer kids looked like they were thriving in a picture-perfect household. But beneath the shiny exterior lay years of compromise, sacrifice, and silent suffering. Karen's story began with a dream of her own. She was pursuing an engineering degree in college when Craig proposed. In December 1985, they married and moved to Colorado, where Craig had landed a promising job. Karen, still only in her 2nd year of college, made a life-altering decision. She dropped out to support Craig's career and focus on building a life together. It was a sacrifice she embraced, believing in the happiness that awaited them. That dream seemed to begin taking shape on April 8, 1991, when their first child, Emily, was born. As Craig's career blossomed, Karen dedicated herself fully to motherhood. But her mother, Pat, couldn't help but notice how Karen always prioritized Craig's needs. In the exhausting early days of motherhood, it was like Karen had stopped living for herself. In 1992, Craig accepted a lucrative job in Greenville, Texas, prompting a family move. The following year, in May 1993, they welcomed their 2nd daughter, Lauren. From the outside, the family appeared enviable. Emily, the eldest, was bright and creative. She played the drums and sang. Lauren, too, was musical, playing bass and singing, while also excelling in sports. But behind closed doors, the pressure of Craig's obsession with perfection began to manifest. A major disagreement over expanding the family marked a turning point. Karen felt 2 children were enough. Craig disagreed. Eventually, they reached an unusual agreement. Karen would consent to 1 more child if Craig agreed to a vasectomy afterward. He agreed, and in March 1999, their son Sean was born. Craig followed through with the vasectomy, and life seemed to settle once again. Another job opportunity soon moved the family to Weatherford, Texas, a quiet suburb near Dallas. Karen, once again adapted to a new town. She joined a local moms group, eventually becoming its president. and forged strong community ties. The kids stayed active and continued to thrive: Millie in academics and music, Lauren in sports and band, and Sean emerging as a baseball prodigy. But while the family's life looked ideal from the outside, Craig's rigid standards loomed over them. His demand for perfection was unrelenting. Lauren, who had a DD and didn't match Emily's academic performance, became the target of his harshest criticisms. To Craig, she simply wasn't good enough, and he didn't hold back in making that known. Craig's controlling nature extended well beyond his children. His colleagues described him as arrogant and difficult. He held little respect for women in leadership roles, often openly stating they didn't belong there. Though he earned $180,000 a year, he was known to be miserly, borrowing tools, tagging along with co-workers to strip clubs, and even asking others to buy him dances. Home. His grip on the family's finances was ironclad. Karen had a strict weekly allowance and was required to save receipts from every purchase. Craig would inspect them thoroughly and explode in anger if he believed she had spent too much or bought anything he deemed unnecessary. But Craig's control wasn't just about money. Every part of their life, including their sex life, was governed by his rules. Karen had to be in bed by 8:30 p.m. sharp. If she dared to answer a phone call after 8 p.m., she would whisper apologies to her friends before quickly hanging up. Failing to meet Craig's bedroom expectations meant she would pay for it. Even the children understood that their parents were not to be disturbed after 8:30. Refusing Craig wasn't an option. His anger was explosive, sometimes violent. Karen learned that compliance was the safest path. Over time, his expectations grew even more disturbing. He suggested introducing a third person, another woman, into their sex life. Karen, deeply uncomfortable, found it difficult to say no. In a quiet act of rebellion and self-care, Karen joined a gym in January 2006. It was something just for her, something that gave her a sliver of independence. Craig refused to fund the membership, so Karen paid for it herself by baking cakes and doing odd jobs. She quickly became a regular at Powerhouse Gym and eventually took on a part-time job as a personal trainer. Craig agreed to let her work, but with one condition: she had to be home by the time the kids got back from school. At the gym, Karen made friends and began opening up. She confided in coworkers about Craig's constant anger, his impossible standards, and the escalating fights at home. Some of those fights turned physical. Her bruises didn't go unnoticed. Everyone at the gym knew she was unhappy and wanted out. Then came Sonia, personal trainer, who listened, understood, and became Karen's confidant. The relationship soon turned romantic and sexual. There's debate about how it started. Some believe Craig orchestrated it, recalling his earlier suggestion of bringing another woman into the relationship. Others believe Karen and Sonny's connection blossomed naturally, with Craig merely tolerating it once he found out. Whatever the truth, the relationship became a threesome. Craig sent flirty texts to Sonny, bought flowers for both women, and even encouraged them to go on weekend getaways together. But in public, he told a different story: that Karen was the problem, and their marriage was falling apart because of her. In 2008, Craig saw an opportunity to reassert control. He was offered a better-paying job in Columbia, Missouri. The move would physically separate Karen from Sonny, and Craig jumped at the chance. Karen was devastated. She didn't want to leave Sonny or her life in Weatherford. The kids were involved in school and sports. She had deep community roots. Still, Craig made the decision unilaterally. As always, he moved to Columbia months ahead of the family, leaving Karen to tie up loose ends back home. During that time, Karen and Sonny decided to maintain their relationship long distance. Craig remained unaware. He believed the affair would fade, and that Karen would revert to the compliant wife she once was. When Karen eventually moved to Columbia with the kids, Craig believed he had re-established control. He even allowed her to enroll in university again, despite Being the only survivor, it was comforting to see that Dushka Wickerminga had loyal friends, loving family, and a compassionate community to support him through his grief. The love and care shown to the Wickerminga family, even after only a short time in Ottawa, highlight just how deeply they had touched their community in the brief period they lived there. Case 5. James. Craig Kaler. James Craig Kaler seemed to have it all. With a six-figure income and a stable job, he provided a life many dreamed of. His wife, Karen, was the ideal homemaker and supermom, managing their household and raising 3 children, Emily, Lauren, and Sean. The kids were thriving, Emily and Lauren in academics and music, and Sean in sports. From the outside, the Kalers were the picture-perfect family, but behind that facade lay years of quiet sacrifice and hidden struggles. Karen had once dreamed of becoming an engineer. She was in her second year of college when she met Craig, but when he got a job offer in Colorado, Karen chose love over ambition. She left school, married Craig in December 1985, and moved to support his career. Their first child, Emily, was born on April 8, 1991. Karen dedicated herself to motherhood, while Craig's career continued to flourish. However, Karen's mother, Pat, noticed a troubling pattern. Even after giving birth, Karen always put Craig's needs first, often at the expense of her own. By 1992, another job opportunity relocated the family to Greenville, Texas. Their second daughter, Lauren, was born in May 1993. Outwardly, the family was doing well. Emily was a creative and intelligent child, playing drums and singing. Lauren was athletic and musical, playing bass and singing too. But beneath the surface, tensions grew. A major point of contention was whether to have more children. Karen felt their family was complete, but Craig wanted one more. They struck an unusual deal. Karen agreed to one more child if Craig would then undergo a vasectomy. In March 1999, their son Sean was born, and Craig kept his word. Life settled down again when Craig took a new job in Weatherford, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. Karen, as always, adapted. She joined a local moms group, eventually becoming its president, and ensured her kids were active in school and sports. Emily excelled in school and music, Lauren in athletics and band, and Sean became a rising baseball star. But Craig's relentless pursuit of perfection created a toxic atmosphere. He held his family to impossibly high standards. Lauren, who had a DD and struggled to match Emily's strata grades, bore the brunt of his criticism. Nothing she did was ever enough. Craig's controlling nature extended beyond the home. He was dismissive of women in leadership roles, considered arrogant at work, and obsessed with appearances. Even though he made $180,000 annually, he was notoriously frugal. Karen was on a strict weekly allowance and had to present receipts for every purchase. He'd erupt in anger over anything he deemed unnecessary or overpriced. But his control didn't stop at finances. It extended into every part of their lives, even their sex life. Karen was expected to be in bed every night by 8:30 p.m. If she didn't comply, she would pay for it. Even when she was ill, Craig demanded she maintain their routine. The kids learned not to disturb their parents after 8:30. What started as a typical marriage had become something rigid and frightening. In time, Craig's demands grew darker. He even proposed inviting another woman into their intimate life, to watch Karen with her. Karen was uncomfortable, but too afraid to say no. Seeking some autonomy, she joined a gym in secret, paying for it herself by baking cakes and working odd jobs. By January 2006, she became a regular at Powerhouse Gym and eventually worked there as a personal trainer. There, she met some fellow trainer who listened and gave Karen a sense of safety. Their friendship deepened into something more. While some believe Craig initially encouraged their relationship, having previously expressed interest in a third party, others think Karen and Sonny's affair began organically. Regardless, Their bond grew, and Craig even encouraged the relationship. At first, sending flirty texts, buying flowers, and planning weekend getaways. However, when the relationship threatened his control, Craig turned cold. He accused Karen of ruining their marriage, and believed his carefully maintained image of a perfect family was falling apart. In 2008, Craig accepted a new job in Columbia, Missouri, far from sunny, and relocated first, hoping the distance would break Karen's bond with her. Karen eventually followed with the kids, but she had changed. She enrolled at the University of Missouri to pursue a health science degree and continued working as a fitness instructor. For the first time, she wanted independence, not permission. Craig, sensing he was losing his grip, became obsessive. He monitored her emails, phone calls, and whereabouts. His control turned into full-on surveillance. Things reached a boiling point on New Year's Eve 2008, when they unexpectedly encountered Sonny at a party in Weatherford. Karen and Sonny's public affection sent Craig into a rage. Their fight escalated until Craig declared Karen's affair in front of everyone. Karen retaliated by kissing Sonny. The situation turned violent. Outside the house, Craig shoved Karen, causing her to fall and hit her head. The next day, Karen told Sonny they needed to take a break, but Sonny, fearing for Karen's safety, told her the real issue was Craig. In January 2009, Karen filed for divorce. She moved into a separate bedroom and continued seeing Sonny. Craig, still obsessively controlling, kept spying on her, tracking her visits, reading her emails, even collecting thousands of pages of notes and screenshots for his lawyer. At work, Craig's mental state visibly declined. He showed coworkers a family photo album, saying, "Why doesn't Karen want a happy family?" In March 2009, after giving a city council speech, Craig and Karen got into a fight that turned physical. He assaulted her, and she called the police. He was arrested and charged with third-degree domestic assault. Karen left the family home with the kids and rented her own place. She also withdrew $50,000 from their shared account, signaling a final break. Craig, devastated by the arrest and losing his job, returned to his parents' farm in Kansas, but his obsession with Karen only grew. He stalked her digitally, blamed Sonny for ruining his family, and used homophobic slurs even though he once encouraged their relationship. His daughters, Emily and Lauren, began to distance themselves too. Emily chose a college Craig didn't approve of. One daughter came out as bisexual, and he blamed Karen for influencing her. He became increasingly erratic, telling friends he wanted to kill Sonny, but no one took him seriously. While his relationships with the women in his life crumbled, Craig focused on Sean. The two spent time fishing and hunting. To Craig, Sean was his last remaining link to the family he believed he had built. By Thanksgiving 2009, Sean was staying with Craig. Karen had planned a family visit to her grandmother Dorothy's home in Burlingame, Kansas. The day after Thanksgiving, she went to pick up Sean to join them. But tragedy was looming. On November 29, 2009, just after 6 p.m., a neighbor in Burlingame reported a strange sight. A man was seen pulling up in a small truck, walking down the road, then returning with an unidentifiable object, placing it in his back seat, and speeding off. Deputies responded to the Sean bet minutes later. Another, far more urgent call came in. What they found was horrifying. Dorothy, 89, was on the kitchen floor, bleeding heavily from multiple gunshot wounds, but still alive. Karen was already dead in the dining room, shot twice. Emily was found behind a couch in the living room, shot and likely paralyzed before dying. Upstairs, 16-year-old Lauren was barely alive. As she was being rushed out, she whispered the name of her killer, "Craig, my dad." She didn't survive. Dorothy, too, died shortly after. The only survivor was Sean, according to his statement. He and Karen had been cleaning old coins together when Craig stormed in through the back door with a rifle and opened fire. Sean ran for his life, trying to call for help, eventually fleeing to a neighbor's home. Craig's car was later found, abandoned in a remote area, eerily quiet and out of place. After taking out yet another plus loan he couldn't repay, James Dunham's finances spiraled out of control. His credit was wrecked, and the mounting stress took a serious toll on his marriage. During their time in Sacramento, Hattie noticed some of her cherished belongings, including her jewelry and favorite watch, had mysteriously vanished. She reported them stolen. But when the items turned up at a local pawn shop, the receipt clearly showed James had sold them. No charges were filed, but the trust was shattered, and their relationship began to unravel. With nowhere else to turn, the McGlinchey family welcomed Hattie and James into their Cherry Farm home, hoping the fresh start would help. But instead of improving things, the situation only worsened. James's erratic behavior strained not only his marriage, but also his relationship with the entire McGlinchey household. He frequently clashed with Colonel McGlinchey, even going so far as to threaten legal action after suffering a minor injury. On the farm, not even Hattie's mother, known for her warmth and kindness, could connect with him. Things deteriorated further once they moved into the McGlinchey family home. James became verbally abusive toward Hattie, often berating her in front of everyone. Her brother Jimmy took serious issue with the way James treated her, and the two men had several heated confrontations, some nearly escalating to physical fights. Then James began disappearing for days at a time, adding to the growing concern that the marriage was falling apart. But in late 1895, the family received unexpected news. Hattie was pregnant. For a brief moment, the household experienced a sense of peace. James, now 30, appeared to turn a corner. He enrolled in pre-law classes at Santa Clara University, and it seemed that maybe, just maybe, he was trying to change. On May 4, 1896, Hattie gave birth to a baby boy, Percy Osborne. The family was overjoyed, celebrating the new arrival and clinging to hope. But just 3 weeks later, their joy would be shattered. According to official reports, the horror began on the night of May 26 around 8:30 p.m. Colonel R.P. and his stepson, Jimmy Wells, stepped out onto the porch and climbed into a carriage. Their driver, George Shibley, waited for the signal before steering them away from the farm. Back at the house were Hattie, baby Percy, the housemaid and nanny Minnie Schlesser, and Hattie's mother, Ada McGlinchey. James Dunham, who had supposedly been in San Jose attending his classes since Sunday, was nowhere to be seen, or so everyone thought. Roughly 100 yards from the main house, the farm manager, Bob Briscoe, was finishing up a long day. It was cherry harvest season, and the hot, grueling labor had left him exhausted. He stretched out on his cot inside a small cabin, unaware that evil was lurking nearby. As dusk fell, James Dunham secretly returned to the property, like a predator, stalking prey. He remained hidden in the shadows. Sometime after 9 p.m., he crept out of hiding and made his way to the barn, where he retrieved a single-bladed axe. Moving silently, he slipped into the main house through the back door. He paused outside Ada McGlinchey's room on the first floor, likely ensuring she was asleep. Then, he slowly climbed the stairs. Upstairs, Hattie sat at her dressing table, brushing her hair. She saw James enter the room, likely catching the glint of the axe in his hand, but had no time to react. Before she could scream, he dropped the axe and lunged, wrapping his hands around her throat. His grip was relentless. The autopsy later revealed he crushed her cervical vertebrae with his bare hands. When her body went limp, James let her fall to the floor, then reached for the axe again. The struggle hadn't gone unnoticed. Nanny Minnie Schlesser, hearing the commotion, left her room to investigate. As she entered the bedroom, she came face to face with James and the axe. He swung without hesitation, delivering a fatal blow to her head. The strike was so forceful, it split her skull in two. Then, in a bizarre and chilling act, James tore strips of linen from the bed and stuffed them into the mouths of his victims. as if to silence them even in death. It's likely Minnie screamed before dying loud enough to wake Ada McGlinchey downstairs. She slipped on her robe and called upstairs, concerned. But what she saw instead was terrifying. James, standing at the top of the stairs, soaked in blood, axe still in hand. Instead of freezing in fear, Ada ran. She darted into the dining room, grabbing anything she could, dishes, cups, vases, hurled them at James in desperation. The chaos she left behind painted a vivid picture. Shattered glass and broken china scattered from the kitchen to the dining room. At some point, James likely stepped on the broken glass, leaving a trail of blood, but the pain only fueled his rage. Despite Ada's courageous resistance at one point scratching his face so deeply that her fingernails left bloody grooves, he eventually overpowered her. She tried to crawl toward her bedroom, but James caught up. Later examinations suggested she endured the most brutal attack of all. Investigators believed James took sick pleasure in mutilating her, striking her over and over in a frenzy that went far beyond killing. Around this same time, two men had snuck onto the property, hoping to steal cherries. The night seemed quiet, but from a distance, they noticed flickering lights in the house. About 10 minutes later, they watched as James calmly stepped onto the porch and lit a cigarette. Terrified, the two thieves fled into the night. At around 11 p.m., Colonel McGlinchey, Jimmy Wells, and George Shibley returned from their political meeting with the American Protective Association. As they pulled into the driveway, McGlinchey instructed George to leave the barn doors open so the horses could stay cool. McGlinchey walked up the steps and entered the house only to be ambushed. James struck him in the head with a heavy object, knocking him out cold. Jimmy, just a few steps behind, rushed in to help. He saw James raise the axe and managed to wrestle it away from him, despite still recovering from a recent bicycle accident. For a brief moment, Jimmy had the upper hand until the gunshots rang out. One bullet struck his shoulder, another pierced his chest. He tried to crawl toward the parlor, but James fired again, this time into his back. As Jimmy lay dying, a final shot to the head ended his life. The scorched fabric on his clothes told investigators how close the gun was when fired. With Jimmy out of the way, James Dunham prepared to finish what he had started. Colonel McGlinchey, still unconscious in the entryway, was left for dead. But when Dunham returned to finish him off, he discovered the colonel had somehow escaped. It turned out Dunham's first swing had missed its mark. The blade struck the handle, knocking McGlinchey out cold, but not killing him. Now, dazed but alive, the colonel had managed to stumble outside, calling for help as he made his way toward the small cabin where farmhand Bob Briscoe had been sleeping. In a panic, Dunham fired his revolver at the fleeing man, but the gun clicked. It was empty. Furious, Dunham dropped the weapon on the porch and pulled out another. He fired blindly into the dark, desperate to take the colonel down. About 300 yards away, a nearby neighbor had been lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep in the warm night. His window was open, but the air offered little relief. He tried reading, but nothing helped until just before 11:30 p.m. The silence was shattered by gunfire and desperate cries for help from the McGlinchey property, visible from his window. Sensing something was terribly wrong, the neighbor threw on his clothes and rushed toward the scene. Meanwhile, Colonel McGlinchey had reached the cabin, where Briscoe stood frozen in fear, having been awakened by the noise. McGlinchey slammed the door shut behind him as Dunham approached, shouting for them to come out. When they refused, he fired 2 shots through the door. Inside, bloodied and weak, McGlinchey tried to stall, telling Dunham he had already been shot and was as good as dead. In the chaos, Briscoe attempted to escape by smashing a rear window, but Dunham was faster. He fired again, hitting Briscoe straight through the heart and killing him instantly. Despite his injuries, McGlinchey made a desperate attempt to flee once more, running out of the cabin toward the house. But Dunham caught up easily. From behind, he aimed his pistol and fired. The colonel collapsed face first in the dirt. Without hesitation, Dunham walked over and executed him with 2 more shots to the head. The neighbor, who had just arrived on the property, saw everything but stayed hidden. He wasn't armed and knew if Dunham spotted him, he'd be next. So he stayed low, heart pounding, as the killer stalked the property. Now, you might be wondering where was George, the carriage driver who had taken Jimmy and the colonel to the political meeting. After helping with the horses, George had heard the gunshots and immediately knew something was wrong. Terrified, he hid in the barn, hoping to wait out the violence. But Dunham suspected George was still nearby. After killing the colonel, he shouted toward the barn, demanding George come out. He searched the house, the cabin, and the barn itself. He even got dangerously close, but by sheer luck, never found him. George later said he was certain his life was over in that moment. Dunham must have believed the driver had escaped or gone for help, because rather than continue the search, he grabbed Jimmy Wells's buckskin horse and rode off into the night, without a saddle. As fate would have it, the frightened neighbor ran into George just as Dunham was disappearing into the dark. George, still shaken, confirmed that the killer had fled only moments earlier. Together, the 2 men returned to the McGlinchey house to assess the damage. Outside, they found Colonel McGlinchey's body, confirming what they feared. He was gone. With heavy hearts, they approached the house. It was eerily silent. They entered, through a side door into the rear parlor, and were instantly hit by the sharp, chemical scent of something burning. That's when they saw Jimmy Wells lying on the floor. His face and upper body were badly burned. His celluloid shirt, collar had ignited from the close-range gunshot that killed him. Moving cautiously through the house, they stepped into the dining room, now a disaster zone. Shattered dishes, broken furniture, and bloody footprints led into a side bedroom. There, they found Mrs. McGlinchey, brutally murdered. Blood was everywhere on the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. Upstairs, they found Minnie Chesser, lifeless in her room, but there was still no sign of Hattie or the baby. Frantically, they searched every corner under beds, in closets. Nothing. Then, from upstairs, came a soft, heartbreaking sound, a baby's cry. Following it, they returned to Minnie's room. Under a pile of linens on the bed, they found infant Percy, alive but crying, lying next to his mother's lifeless body. Beside the bed was a handwritten note that read, "Please say goodbye for me to my dear mother, brother, and stepfather." At first, some thought Hattie had written it, perhaps knowing her end was near. But as suspicions grew, others began to wonder if Dunham had written the note himself. To throw off investigators, some theorized that Dunham hadn't intended to kill the entire family, that perhaps the brutal murder of Minnie Chesser triggered a bloodlust that spiraled out of control. As for little Percy, the sole survivor of the Orchard City massacre, he was taken in by neighbors and eventually adopted by his maternal grandparents, Harriet and Michael Brewer. The funerals came quickly. Minnie Chesser, just 28, was buried on May 28th, 2 days after the massacre, in an unmarked grave in Section P of Oak Hill Cemetery. What was meant to be a private ceremony quickly swelled as community members arrived to pay their respects. The next day, on May 29th, the McGlinchey Wells family was buried together in a nearby plot at Oak Hill, alongside Oscar Wells and Bob Briscoe. The headstones for the victims except for Oscar's were inscribed with a single biblical phrase, "Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord." As for James Dunham, the man responsible, he didn't vanish entirely. On Thursday, May 28th, two locals Oscar Parker and Everett Snell were traveling through the Mount Hamilton foothills near Smith's Creek Hotel when they spotted a suspicious man on horseback. The horse had no saddle or bridle matching the one stolen from the McGlinchey ranch. The man looked rough, his face was scratched, his clothes torn, and he wore gunny sacks on his feet by then. Both Parker and Snell had heard about the Orchard City massacre. and they immediately recognized the writer, James Dunham. Snell had worked with Dunham years earlier and was certain it was him. The cold, wild look in his eyes and the angry red scratches on his face gave it away. Though Parker and Snell were both hardened men, used to the dangers of ranch life, they felt the weight of what Dunham had done. Still, they kept their cool and didn't let on that they knew who he was. The fugitive seemed tense, but tried to act casual. He told them he hadn't eaten in days and admitted to breaking into Snell's cabin for food. Parker, noticing how worn down he looked, offered to let him stay the night. But the man declined, nervous, anxious, and clearly desperate to keep moving. He said he needed to reach a nearby valley before dark and asked for directions. Parker, thinking fast, pointed him toward the main trail and told him there were bandits in the hills. Warning meant to keep him on the open path where he'd be easier to track later, after parting ways with the stranger. Parker and Snell went straight to the Smith's Creek Hotel and called the sheriff's office. The sheriff responded immediately, assembling his men and bringing along 2 bloodhounds. They made their way to the site without delay, but just as they arrived, a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the area and making it impossible to continue the search. It wasn't until the fog lifted the next morning that the manhunt resumed in full force. And by the end of that day, they found something big. The horse that belonged to Jimmy Wells, the very same horse James Dunham had stolen from the McGlinchey property. Alongside it were scraps of Dunham's clothing and signs of recent campfires. Then, something strange happened. While searching the area, the team heard a single, sudden gunshot. No one could determine where it had come from or who had fired it. Some thought it might have been a hunter in the mountains, but others believed James Dunham may have taken his own life. Still, with no body found, that theory remained speculation. The next day, May 30th, more evidence surfaced. Dunham had apparently broken into a cabin near Mount Hamilton, confirming he was still alive at the time. By June 1st, word spread that he had purchased supplies, reigniting the search with fresh urgency. Not long after, a rifle and a pistol were reported stolen from a cabin in Glenwood, further convincing authorities that Dunham had escaped Mount Hamilton and was heading south. On June 2nd, the sheriff and his posse boarded a train bound for Hollister. After hearing that Dunham might be traveling by night through the KBA Valley, they suspected he might be seeking refuge in Mexican communities that hadn't yet heard of the murders. 2 days later, on June 4th, a man at Hayes Station gave an eerily precise description of Dunham's appearance: clothing, shoes, hat, tavern, though he hadn't been asked. This bolstered the belief that Dunham was hiding out somewhere in Tulare County. A man in Merced later claimed he had shared a meal with Dunham, but that lead went nowhere. By June 7th, the trail had gone cold, and some doubted he had ever made it as far as Fresno County. Rumors suggested he may have abandoned his horse for a bicycle, something far less conspicuous. Dunham, after all, was known to be a skilled long-distance cyclist. One report even claimed he had been spotted in Bakersfield as early as May 29th, riding a bike. Looking back, it became clear that Dunham had planned his escape well in advance. Just 1 day before the massacre, May 25th, he withdrew his entire life savings from the bank, totaling $11,000. The next day, he reportedly stashed a bicycle in some brush, just a few hundred yards from the house. The theory that he used a bike to flee wasn't just plausibly, it was likely. As leads dried up and the manhunt lost momentum, one chilling question lingered: why did he do it? On June 1st, nearly a week after the murders, Audie's McGlinchey's will was made public. It sent shockwaves through the investigation. Just 80 days before her death, she had changed the document. None of her estate would go to her husband, Colonel R.P. McGlinchey. Instead, everything in amount totaling over $335,000 was left to her grandson, James Wells. Her daughter, Hattie, received only $100. This revelation sparked a disturbing new theory. What if Dunham murdered the entire family so his son would inherit the fortune? With everyone gone, the estate would pass directly to the boy, making Dunham the trustee and legal guardian in charge of the wealth. It pointed not to a man acting out of rage, but to a cold, calculated killer driven by greed. Still, one question remained. How did he plan to get away with it? Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The trail grew cold. The community, once unified in the hunt, slowly moved on. A year later, even the most relentless searchers had to concede. James Dunham had disappeared without a trace. Yet sightings continued to surface. Reports placed him in Texas, Wyoming, even China. Some believed he fled to Cuba on a steamer. Others thought he died in the mountains. Every tip offered a glimmer of hope, only to end in another dead end. Over the years, many men were accused of being the fugitive. Just weeks after the murders, a man near San Miguel was suspected of being Dunham after asking for food, but he turned out to be just another outlaw. In 1897, a man arrested in Mexico fit Dunham's general description, but he too was cleared. Then in 1901, authorities arrested Charles Franklin Krill in Wichita, Kansas. He shared Dunham's height, weight, and even had similar scars. He was brought back to San Jose and charged as Dunham. After weeks of intense questioning, he was finally released, later profited from the ordeal by selling tickets to curious locals eager to meet the man who almost hanged. The false leads didn't stop there. In 1902, rumors swirled that Dunham was living among the Navajo. In 1904, a dying man in Arizona confessed on his deathbed to being Dunham, but that too turned out false. In 1908, William Hatfield from Texas was hauled all the way to San Jose for a hearing, only to be released soon after. As years passed and sightings dwindled, many came to believe Dunham had died shortly after the murders, perhaps in the mountains where he was last seen. This theory gained traction when skeletal remains started turning up. In 1898, just 2 years after the massacre, a set of bones was discovered and examined, but no conclusive link was ever made. Over the following decades, more remains were found, including some in the Pacheco Pass area, yet none could be confirmed as his. In one strange twist, a set of bones even vanished, possibly stolen by someone hoping to claim the reward money. The mystery persisted. Alternative theories emerged. Some claimed Dunham didn't commit the murders at all, that he was killed and framed to divert suspicion from the real culprits. But with no credible evidence, these claims were largely dismissed. More than a century has passed, and the question still haunts California history. Did James Dunham die in the wilderness, forgotten and alone? Or did he vanish into a new life, hidden behind a different name? No one knows for sure, but the horror of that night left a lasting scar, especially on the only survivor, Percy Osborne. Dunham. Percy was just a baby when it happened. To protect him, he was renamed Percy Brewer and raised by his grandmother. Despite his tragic beginnings, Percy lived a remarkable life. He became a pilot, served in both world wars, and retired as a colonel. But no matter how far he rose, the shadow of his family's past likely never left him. It all seemed so simple at first, just a tragic accident, a young mother's life cut short. But beneath that surface explanation, something darker was lurking. What really happened to Alina Frick that night? And how did a woman who appeared to have it all end up the victim of such a devastating turn of fate? Alina Frick was born in 1977 in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, to Joseph and Anna Frick. Her parents were Croatian immigrants who had come to Canada in the 1960s to work at General Motors. Alina had an older sister, Carolyn, born in 1970. Tragically, after Caroline's birth, the Fricks endured the heartbreak of 2 miscarriages and were told they couldn't have more children. Elena's birth was a miracle to them, an unexpected blessing. When Elena was still young, the family relocated from Windsor to the small town of Tuma in southwestern Ontario. There, she grew up as a bright, curious child who loved books. She attended St. Peter's Elementary and later Santa Ana High School, where she participated in Croatian folk dance, helped harvest corn in the summers, and competed on the school's track and field team. During high school, Alina met Matthew Reno. The two became inseparable. They spent holidays together, shared family meals, and bonded deeply over music. In the 1990s, they fulfilled a dream by attending a Nirvana concert. Together, their favorite band. Everyone assumed they'd marry one day. But after high school, life pulled them in different directions. Alina moved to Ottawa to study medicine, while Matthew stayed in their hometown. The distance strained their relationship. Despite being engaged, Alina ended things to focus on her future. Her motivation came, in part, from watching her parents work long, exhausting shifts at the factory. She was determined to build a better, more stable life. Her ambition paid off. Alina excelled at the University of Ottawa's medical school. In 2003, during her residency at the Ottawa Hospital, she met Mohammed Shami in the hospital's recreation room while playing pool. Mohammed was a neurosurgery resident, the son of renowned thoracic surgeon Dr. Farid Chamyand, came from a wealthy, well-connected family. He had attended the country's top schools and was widely considered a medical prodigy. Mohammed began joining her for pool games and soon asked her out. Alina was captivated by his intelligence, ambition, and elite background. Still, she sometimes doubted whether she truly fit into his world. Despite those doubts and early signs of trouble, the relationship moved forward. Mohammed missed her medical school graduation, claiming he was ill, only for Alina to later learn he had been out with friends. He was also unfaithful, continuing a relationship with another woman from his university days. Yet, each time she tried to leave, Mohammed managed to pull her back in with charm and promises. In April 2004, Alina introduced Mohammed to her parents. Joseph and Anna were not impressed. They found him cold and uninterested. Joseph advised his daughter not to settle, that she deserved someone who would treat her better. One morning, Anna overheard the couple arguing. When she asked what was wrong, Alina, visibly upset, brushed it off as a sleepless night. Not long after, Alina discovered she was pregnant. This news placed Mohammed in a difficult position. His conservative Muslim parents would not approve of an out-of-wedlock child or of him marrying outside their faith. After weighing his options, Mohammed agreed to marry Alina. They planned two ceremonies, one to honor his Muslim traditions and one for her Christian background. The first wedding took place on September 1st, 2004, in Ottawa. Alina was nearly 5 months pregnant and participated in the traditional Muslim ceremony, including intricate henna designs on her hands. Her mother, Anna, found the ceremony unfamiliar and unsettling. The guest list reflected the couple's contrasting backgrounds. Mohammed's family consisted of affluent doctors and socialites, while Alina's were working-class blue-collar relatives. Alcohol was officially banned at the wedding, though. Some guests discreetly drank outside in the parking lot. Before their second ceremony at a Catholic church, the couple was required to attend counseling. Mohammed refused to go and even asked a mutual friend, John Mark, to attend in his place. When John declined, they skipped counseling entirely. Still, they went through with a modest wedding at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Windsor. Alina wore long gloves to conceal her henna, and the couple celebrated with a small reception and brief honeymoon at Caesar's Hotel and Casino. Afterward, they settled into a new home in Ottawa. Alina began working as a family doctor at the Ottawa Hospital, while Mohammed continued his neurosurgery residency. In January 2005, Alina gave birth to a baby girl after a difficult pregnancy. She was overjoyed, but Mohammed remained emotionally distant. He often retreated to his study, barely acknowledging Alina or their child. When Muhammad's family visited shortly after the baby's birth, Alina, upstairs breastfeeding, didn't come down to greet them. Muhammad was furious, berating her afterward for what he saw as a sign of disrespect. As time passed, Muhammad's behavior became increasingly controlling and emotionally abusive. Elena confided in her parents, saying she felt like she was walking on eggshells in her own home. Muhammad frequently criticized her weight, her cooking, and her appearance. Friends and family noticed a change in Elena. She seemed unhappy and withdrawn. One day, Muhammad called Elena's parents in a panic, claiming she wanted a divorce. Elena quickly took the phone and assured them everything was fine, but not long after, they received a disturbing call. When they used the redial function to return a missed call from Elena's house, they overheard Muhammad yelling, hurling insults at their daughter. It was a chilling moment that confirmed their worst fears. That spring, Muhammad was accepted into a prestigious PhD program at Duke University in North Carolina. Seeing an opportunity for a fresh start, Elena enrolled in Duke's master's program in public policy. The couple planned to move that fall, but just days before the move, a violent argument erupted. Muhammad assaulted Elena. Terrified, she fled with their daughter to a friend's apartment. Muhammad, unaware of her location, began calling around, until he finally tracked her down 3 days later. He promised to stay with his parents if she came home. Still frightened, Elena returned, but only after asking John Mark to remain nearby until her parents could arrive. Muhammad was charged with 3 criminal offenses, 1 count of assault, and 2 counts of making threats. These charges jeopardized his medical career and his ability to cross into the U.S. to begin his studies. In an attempt to salvage his future, Muhammad worked to reconcile with Elena. Weeks later, the family baptized their daughter in Windsor. When guests asked about Muhammad's absence, Elena told some that he was working, but privately, she admitted to her cousin Rob that they had fought again. Rob urged her to leave Muhammad for good, telling her she deserved someone who truly loved her. Elena insisted she still hoped they could work things out. On July 27, 2005, prosecutors agreed to drop the charges against Muhammad if he signed a peace bond and agreement to keep the peace and have no further incidents. But a decision to give him another chance would have fatal consequences. Though Elena had valid reasons to fear Muhammad, she ultimately accepted a 12-month probation agreement, resulting in the charges being dismissed. The timing was crucial, just in time for Muhammad to begin his PhD at Duke University and cross the border without any complications. He relocated to Durham, North Carolina, to start the program, and a few months later, Elena and their young daughter joined him. To those around her, Elena's decision to return to Muhammad was baffling. She was intelligent, financially stable, and backed by a supportive family, while some speculated that she was drawn to the status and prestige of being married to a future neurosurgeon. Others believed she still loved him and clung to the hope that their relationship might improve. Once in Durham, the couple slipped into a disciplined routine. They trained for marathons together, often waking before dawn to run. Afterward, Elena would drop their daughter off at daycare and head to Duke, where both she and Muhammad excelled academically. Muhammad completed his 5-year PhD in just 3.5 years. Elena, too, shone in a rare scholarship that covered most of her tuition and being recognized as the best in her class. After classes, she would pick up their daughter and Muhammad before heading home to make dinner. Repeating this daily rhythm, in 2007, Elena gave birth to their second daughter. But even as the family grew, friends began noticing troubling imbalances in their marriage. Elena handled nearly all the household responsibilities, from grocery shopping to assembling furniture, even changing light bulbs. When a friend, Valentina Nikolova, asked why she was always the one driving Muhammad around, Elena simply explained that he disliked driving. Despite outward appearances, Muhammad held a controlling grip on Elena. She constantly sought his permission for even the smallest decisions. while he bombarded her with phone calls when she was out, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. To outsiders, she seemed confident and in control. But behind closed doors, Alina often diminished herself, frequently praising Mohammed's brilliance while claiming she felt small in comparison. After finishing their studies in 2009, the family returned to Ottawa and moved into a home near the hospital, where they both secured jobs. Alina quickly became a beloved family doctor, adored by patients. Mohammed, meanwhile, advanced in his neurosurgery training and earned recognition for his exceptional care. On social media, they portrayed the image of a happy, wealthy family with beautiful children. But in reality, Mohammed controlled every aspect of their online presence, deciding which photos Alina could post, and even pressuring her to confront people he disliked. His control extended into their personal lives as well. He wouldn't allow Alina to subscribe to her favorite newspaper, limited which families their daughters could associate with, and routinely insulted her, calling her useless and stupid, often claiming he would have been better off without her. In 2011, Mohammed moved to Calgary for a year-long spinal surgery fellowship. It was during this time that Alina discovered he was having an affair. She found incriminating emails and noticed a hotel charge made on Mother's Day. When confronted, Mohammed didn't deny it. Devastated, Alina considered leaving him, encouraged by friends who believed she deserved better, but she stayed. She wanted his approval, felt invested in their life together, and still held on to the hope that she could be enough for him. Mohammed promised to end the affair, and soon after, he landed his dream job as a neurosurgeon at Toronto Western Hospital. The couple moved again, this time to North York, purchasing a $1.5 million home. Alina left her job in Ottawa and eventually found a position at the Earl Bales Clinic, though she confided in friends that the role felt beneath her skills and unfulfilling. After settling in, Mohammed suggested they have another child. He said the empty room in their new home deserved a son. Alina agreed, hoping another baby might restore some of what had been lost in their marriage. In October 2013, she gave birth to their third child, a boy. For nearly 2 years after their son's birth, things seemed to calm. Alina became close with her new boss, Allison Kaufman, who lived just across the street. Their daughters thrived in private school. At the hospital, Mohammed developed a reputation for pulling off near-miraculous surgeries. In 2015, Alina took a job at Scarborough Hospital and became a district delegate for the Ontario Medical Association. Her career was thriving, but Mohammed resented her growing success. The old tension crept back in March 2016. The family took a trip to Vermont, stopping first in Ottawa to leave their son with Mohammed's parents. That evening, Mohammed called Alina's parents, claiming she had severely cut her hand and was undergoing surgery. But Alina later gave several inconsistent explanations, saying she'd hit a glass, cut vegetables, or broken a dish. None of the stories seemed to add up, and the injury clearly wasn't accidental. In Vermont, tensions exploded. They argued about Mohammed's past affair. During the fight, he cruelly compared Alina to his former mistress, claiming the other woman was superior in every way. The confrontation turned violent. Mohammed attempted to strangle her. Though Alina told friends about the assault, she chose not to report it, fearing how us authorities might respond to a man named Mohammed. A few months later, the couple celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, an occasion that would unknowingly be their last. Alina gifted him a card that read, "My dearest Mohammed, I love you with all my heart. 12 years, 3 kids, 4 cities, 2 countries, a lifetime of memories. I can't wait for the next 50 years." But behind the poetic sentiment, a darker truth loomed. By late 2016, Alina had begun speaking with a lawyer. She wanted out. Mohammed, sensing her distance, panicked. He begged her to stay. She said she'd think about it, but her suspicions that he was seeing someone else only grew. When she shared her doubts with a friend, The friend jokingly suggested she should find a lover of her own. Surprisingly, Alina did. She began a relationship with another doctor, also married with children. He treated her with tenderness, made her feel seen, feel happy, something she admitted she hadn't felt since marrying Mohammed. He encouraged her to leave and envision a life beyond the control and fear. Alina finally found the courage. She confided in her lawyer about a violent assault Mohammed had committed in October, something she had told no one before. It was the final straw. She wasn't just leaving for herself, but for the safety of her children. By late November, Alina filed for divorce. Mohammed tried to lure her back with lavish gestures, including a large box of chocolates, but she stood firm. On November 24th, Alina emailed a friend, apologizing for being distant. "I'm in the process of separating from my husband, and things at home are chaotic. I'll try to catch up with you this weekend. I'll be away at a conference." That weekend, Alina attended the conference, speaking on panels, networking, and socializing. Mohammed texted her frequently, pretending to be the doting husband. When she returned home that Sunday night, she told close friends that the divorce papers had been served. Her lawyer had formally contacted Mohammed the next day, emphasizing Alina's desire for a swift, amicable resolution and requesting full financial disclosure. Alina moved into the basement of their home, but Mohammed persistently moved her belongings back into the master bedroom. On December 1st, 2016, family grew concerned when they couldn't reach her. After repeated attempts, they called Mohammed. He hesitated, then claimed Alina had left the house the night before with a suitcase and her boyfriend. But her mother knew her daughter would never abandon her children, and so she reached out to Allison Kaufman, the neighbor across the street. Former boss and neighbor, Allison, grew concerned and decided to check on her. When she peered into the garage, she noticed that Alana's car was still parked in its usual spot. Alarmed, she contacted Alana's parents, who immediately called the police and began an overnight drive from Windsor to Toronto. When officers arrived at the house, Mohammed repeated his story. Alana had supposedly left the home with a suitcase. Following standard procedure, the police conducted a search of the residence, but found no trace of her. Later that same day, the grim truth began to unfold. A woman's body was discovered stuffed inside a suitcase near the Humber River. She was barefoot, dressed in pajamas, and had suffered severe head trauma. The autopsy confirmed she had been beaten and then strangled. When the body was brought in for identification, Alana's mother, Anna, couldn't recognize her daughter. Her face was swollen and unrecognizable from the brutal injuries. But her father, Joseph, despite the unbearable pain, tearfully confirmed, "This is my daughter." The investigation quickly zeroed in on one person, Mohammed Shamdi. He was arrested the very next day while sitting inside a cafe. Undercover officers approached him and calmly handcuffed him at his table. As the case unfolded, more chilling details emerged. On the night of her murder, Ilana had attempted to dial 911, but only managed to punch in 611 before Mohammed stopped her. Even more horrifying, he killed her while their 3 children were inside the house. Their eldest daughter later shared that she heard her mother screaming. Frightened, she crept toward her parents' bedroom and found her father lying face down on the bed. When he saw her, he ordered her back to her room. The case shocked Canada. 2 seemingly successful, respected doctors, the image of a perfect marriage, had been hiding a nightmarish reality. Alana's funeral took place on December 17, 2016, at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Windsor, the same church where she had been baptized and years later married the very man who took her life. In the aftermath, Alana's parents, Joseph and Anna Frick, moved into her home to care for the children, ensuring they could stay in their school and preserve some sense of normalcy. In May 2019, more than 2 years after the crime, Mohammed Shamji pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as part of a plea deal. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 14 years. Millions followed the case as it made headlines across the country. Alana's eldest daughter publicly stated she hated her father for what he had done and doubted she would ever be able to forgive him. Today, Alana's children live with their maternal grandparents in Windsor. They often talk about their mother, but never mention their father's name. Case 8. The abduction of Denise. Amber Leet was just another ordinary evening. Traffic was thick, cars lined up at a red light. Jane sat alone in her vehicle, waiting for the light to change when something chilling caught her eye. From the car next to hers, she heard a woman screaming, desperate, terrified cries for help. Jane turned and saw it, a small, frantic hand banging against the rear window. The driver, a man with a cold, blank stare, kept his eyes fixed on the road, hands clenched around the wheel. Then, he noticed her watching. Without warning, he hit the gas, weaving dangerously through traffic until he disappeared. Shaken, Jane immediately grabbed her phone and called 911. What she didn't know was that what she had just witnessed wasn't a misunderstanding. It was part of a horrific chain of events that could have been stopped that very night. This is the tragic story of Denise Amber Lee. The emergency dispatch center received a disturbing call, one that was anything but ordinary. A woman remained on the line for nearly 5 minutes, but instead of clearly addressing the operator, she seemed to be talking to someone else. Her voice trembled as she pleaded to go home, begged to be reunited with her family. At one point, she did ask the dispatcher for help, but most of her words were clearly directed at the person holding her captive. The dispatcher struggled to make sense of the cryptic call until a vital detail emerged. The woman managed to whisper that she'd been taken against her will by a man she didn't know. Before the line was abruptly cut off, she gave one final, crucial piece of information: the make of the car she was in. That small detail was enough to confirm a lead investigators had received earlier that day. Despite Denise's incredible bravery in making that call, the authorities couldn't locate her. The phone she had used belonged to her abductorette, was a burner with no GPS tracking capabilities. But the investigation was gaining momentum. Soon, they had a name: Michael King. Michael, 36 years old, lived not far from Denise and her family. Born on May 4, 1971, in Michigan, he'd married young and had a child. But by 2002, after a bitter divorce, he packed up and moved to Florida. He worked for a time as a plumber, but eventually quit without explanation. From there, Michael's life began to spiral. He was repeatedly fired from jobs, often for inappropriate behavior toward women. In one especially troubling incident, he allegedly exposed himself to a woman who was breastfeeding her baby. She never filed a report. Neighbors described Michael as odd, unpredictable. He frequented nudist clubs and often clashed with people in the neighborhood. Some believed he struggled with an intellectual disability. It later came to light that he had suffered a severe head injury as a child in a sledding accident, possibly contributing to his erratic behavior. By 2007, his life was in tatters. He was unemployed, bankrupt, and on the verge of losing his home. And now, he had Denise. At 6:23 p.m., just 9 minutes after Denise's desperate call, and 3 hours after her disappearance was reported, County received another tip, this time from a teenage girl named Sabrina. Sabrina, 17, was the daughter of Harold, Michael King's cousin. Clearly shaken, she pleaded for confidentiality, but insisted what she had witnessed couldn't be ignored. Around 6 p.m., she said, Michael had shown up unannounced at her father's house. He asked to borrow a shovel, a gas can, and a flashlight. Sabrina thought it was odd, but then came the chilling moment. As Michael prepared to leave, Sabrina saw a woman suddenly emerge from his car, panicked, trying to escape. But before she could get far, Michael grabbed her by the hair and dragged her back into the vehicle. Alarmed, Harold asked what was going on, but Michael brushed it off, claiming it was just a fight with his girlfriend. He warned Harold to stay out of it. Terrified but determined to help, Sabrina provided police with the exact location of her uncle's house. She hoped they could reach Denise in time. By now, law enforcement had compiled a significant file on Michael King. Then, another call came in, at 6:30 p.m. A woman named Jane